Hey guys, it's Mr. Wells here. Today we're going to further on into our brief history of theater. The last thing we studied was Greek theater. Now we're going to continue on into the Middle Ages. One thing that's really peculiar about the Middle Ages is there was no cultural activity, really little to no cultural activity. Um, it was literally 400 years. That's why it's considered the Dark Ages, because art and culture laid dormant for 400 years. The only exception would be in the church. Um, Now there was theater in the church. I don't know how many of y'all have theater in y'all's churches, um, or theater wherever it is you go, but they had something known as tropes, and they were called short dramatized scenes that would be in church services. Now these tropes began in France and quickly spread throughout the European subcontinent. Now tropes began first as Easter and Nativity tableaus, and pretty much they were just still pictures with humans. There wasn't any movement. People would just create the human picture painting. To give you an idea, it'd be like a nativity scene that you see that people use for Christmas decorations and churches will put out. Now, these tableaus were actually meant to help illiterate members better understand biblical stories from Easter and Nativity. Then later on, these things developed into pantomimes, which is movement with meaning to tell a story. They would actually move and create a more visually aesthetic um, story. And then, of course, it soon gave way to dialogue, which actually first started out as Latin and eventually evolved into their own local languages. Now, to give you ideas about these types of liturgical plays, you had mystery plays, miracle plays, morality plays, and of course passion plays. Now, the mystery plays started off as Bible stories that were just reenacted, whether it be Samson and Delilah, it could be David and Goliath. Those might be things to visually see being reenacted, someone throwing a slingshot at someone. But then you have miracle plays, and those were people reenacting the lives of saints. To give you an example, St. George. So someone would be a dragon, and then someone would reenact St. George killing a dragon. And then we have morality plays, which is stories teaching right from wrong. And then we have a passion play. Now, today's time, we associate passion plays with the final days of Jesus and his resurrection. But really, a passion play was any story that was associated with Jesus' life. It could be any story from the gospel, it could be a parable he spoke, but nowadays is associated with Jesus' final days and resurrection. Now, these things began in 1633 to give you a good idea. Now, Germany had a town in Germany that started doing this. Back when the Black Plague happened, this town had prayed that they would be kept safe from the Black Plague, and that if they were kept safe from the Black Plague, they would do a passion play. And of course, they were protected from the Black Plague, so the next year they began and got ready and did their passion play. And they've performed this for over 300 years. It's still performed to this day. So if you're ever in Germany around Passion time, I recommend going to see this passion play because you'll know it's really old. So that kind of moves us out of the Dark Ages into the Renaissance. And now the word Renaissance is a French word that means rebirth. So what's happened is we've gone from the Dark Ages of no culture, and people begin to rebirth society by making new art and new music and new forms of theater. Now we had Spanish Renaissance theater, French Renaissance theater, and Italian Renaissance theater. And what we're going to focus on, just for time, is to focus on Italian theater. Now, the Renaissance form of Italian theater was Commedia dell'arte. And this was written by a guy named Dante Alighieri. And he was incredibly educated, very smart, and he was actually inspired by the Greek comedian playwright Menander that we just learned in the first video. Now, you remember how Menander based his plays on a psychological approach, where he actually began to humanize the drama. Menander actually began to create stock character for his farces. So he would have the evil guy, he had the jester, he had all these stock characters. And so Dante formed his comedy of the art of comedy. That's what commedia dell'arte means, the art of comedy. And they were pretty much caught the art of creating professional improvised comedy acts that were performed in the streets for anybody. And these troops, these improvising troops that did this art, included 7 men and 3 women. And these acts would include ad-lib action. It had dialogue, it had song, it had dance, and it would all be around a specific scenario that they created on the spot that usually included love and intrigue. Now, our characters of Commedia dell'arte, you had the Harlequin, and he was the jester that was clever and witty servant. One thing you need to know about Commedia dell'arte is that the Harlequin, the jester, was kind of the wits behind every situation. And he was also the most loved and admired person. Then one thing too is the Pantalone. He was a global father, but he had a costume trademark, which was loose trousers. And so every time you would be walking down the street to see a Commedia dell'arte troupe, which we can't do now, but during the Renaissance, if you saw somebody wearing loose pants and acting and falling for stuff, you would know that that was Pantalone. And if you didn't know, Pantalone is actually pants in Italian. Anyway, so enough about Commedia dell'arte. We'll have time to do improvisations in class, so don't worry. There's Elizabethan theater. This is really neat, except for the first line. It looks like Queen Elizabeth. I loved theater and support all facets of theater. That's actually Queen Elizabeth I. When she took the throne in London, it was a miracle for dramatists and actors and playwrights because Queen Elizabeth I loved theater and supported all facets of theater. She even paid people to write plays for the court. This age period was an age of literary enlightenment. I mean, you had brilliant playwrights writing with great freedom. Playwrights began to write their own stories, their own plot forms. And to give you an example, William Shakespeare, he's considered to be the greatest of all English playwrights, but he created his own plot structure. That's the type of freedom you had. And they were able to do it without being scrutinized by anybody because the Queen loved it. Now, one thing that's neat about William Shakespeare is that we don't know much about him at all. We know that he attended grammar school. That's his only formal education he ever had, and that he left his wife and children to follow a career in acting and writing. And we also know that he wrote 38 plays, and that he created original histories, comedies, tragedies, and fantasies. He even wrote and created his own original plots, which we'll get into plots through the year. Some of his most noted works, really some of my favorite, would be Hamlet, Midsummer Night's Dream, and Romeo and Juliet. That last line, that just talks about his famous speeches that would take place in his plays. They were like monologues, but they would be lengthy speeches that people would really say on the stage. The actors of Shakespeare that did all these plays were all men. There were no women involved with this. And the boys would play the roles of women. Or maybe a guy whose voice hasn't changed yet. So, I mean, you would see all men on stage, men would play the girls' parts. It was really a peculiar time as far as performance went because women were not allowed to do much. And then we moved into the 18th century theater. So I hope you enjoyed that. Some really cool thing about Shakespeare is that since women weren't allowed to perform or be playwrights or do anything with theater during the Elizabethan age, there's some people who argue that William Shakespeare didn't write any of the stuff he wrote, that an actual woman wrote it, and that woman paid William Shakespeare to put his name on all this stuff. So that's how she was able to perform what she wanted to get performed. I honestly believe it was William Shakespeare. I can't see that not being written down around the open. Um, anyway, it's pretty cool. If you want to know more about the William Shakespeare didn't write William Shakespeare stuff theory, you can come talk to me about it. I can give you some more information if you want to look into it. I think it's pretty cool, to at least to hear these other opinions and to hear the debate between it. Anyway, so that's it. I hope you can stick around for video 3, and we can finish up this brief history of theater.